Hey guys, welcome back to THM, and on the bench today, if you've seen this and it looks familiar to you, that's because you saw the previous video where we diagnosed an oil leak and a no start issue, but let me bring you up to speed if you haven't seen it. So real quick, what happened is a friend of mine dropped off his generator. It wasn't running. When I diagnosed it, I couldn't get it to spark. We added some oil to the crankcase, some good used oil to the crankcase, and we managed to get it to run. However, we discovered a pretty significant oil leak. So there's two things we're going to challenge today and tackle. We're going to fix the oil leak, at least locate it properly, and we're also going to deal with that phantom spark, because I tried, looking for spark with a spark tester, never found any. However, after putting the plug back in, miraculously started first pull. So let's just get into it, and we'll start by tearing it apart, seeing if we can get the engine out of the frame. I think the smartest thing to do here for starters is to drain the crankcase, because I'm going to probably have this in every orientation possible so I can get to all the hardware. So I'm going to start by draining the old oil that I have in here. Because like I said in the previous video I should say, I added, that was pretty tight. I added some oil because this engine has a low oil alert, which will not allow it to spark or start. So by doing so, I managed to get it to run. Oh, no, again, here I am making a mess. Guys, I'm sorry. If you've seen my videos before, it's like a recurring thing. Something that's not so recurring though is I'm going to start by adding a tip of the day at the end of my video. So stick around to the end to see what that tip is, and hopefully you guys can make use of it. And also, if you guys have tips of your own that you'd like to share, make sure you comment down below and help out the whole community. Okay, so it looks like I got some bolts underneath this cover. So there's two 10mm bolts on each side here. And in order to make myself organized, take out the wife's old muffin pan again. That way there I know where everything goes. And will that be enough to take this off? Okay, that's how that goes. Kind of just fold over like that. Now that gives me access to these bolts that I can remove for the fuel tank. And make sure this is off. I'm going to undo the fuel line, and hopefully, yeah, it's already loose, so that should just come right out. Pliers in there. Alright, get this out of the way. There you go. Out you come. And of course, it's always full. You know, when you need gas in a machine to test it, it always seems to come to you empty, and when you don't need it, it always seems to come to you full. Anyways, without that in the way, there's a lot more access to everything else. So how are we going to get this engine separated from the generator? So it looks to me like another thing that might be easy to do and give me more access is to remove this muffler. This is actually a pretty darn big muffler for a small engine, but that's probably why these Hondas are quiet. So got a couple more bolts up here. I'm gonna use my old school ratchet wrench. You guys remember these things? Still use them from time to time because I don't have a good set of ratchet wrenches here. I got those at work. So there's a heat shield. What's this? Another heat shield? Another heat shield. Wow. No way you were burning your hand by touching this. Well, actually, it looks like you don't have to remove the engine or the muffler from the engine, because we'll just be able to take the whole engine out of the frame, it seems, and that'll probably make things much easier. crack these bolts free and remove it from the frame. Got some 12 millimeter bolts holding the engine into the motor mounts. That was the last bolt. All right, now this should hopefully fall right out. Well, not fall right out, but you know what I mean. How am I going to pick this up? Oh. One. And there. Okay, now, how does this slide out of this? Okay. Got a couple things in the way here. Stuff that I was hoping not to have to play with, like the exhaust and the intake and all the rest of it. Well, there's no way around it. Seems like you're taking the exhaust off because there's no possible way to flip this around to get it in the frame. So that's what we're going to do. Take the exhaust out, hopefully without too many issues. Only 3 bolts really, but I just don't like playing with exhaust bolts because sometimes they don't give me the best of luck. There you go. Now let's see what happens when you take the exhaust can off. Yep. Okay, so there you go. If you ever do this job, guys, you gotta take the muffler off to take the frame out. And now we're left with the actual generator. We've got the, this is the power plant right here, and then this is our generator half. So I think the easiest way to tackle this is to split them both, because as you can see, we got some oil leakage, well, all over my hands, and I'm thinking some of this might be some gas from the carburetor as well. But if we split this, we'll be able to go take a look at the seal that might be leaking. Because if I roll this around, now that we can see it really well, the oil leak happens to come from between here. The only thing that is between there is more than likely an oil seal between the generator and the engine. So yeah, there's only, as far as I can tell, a few bolts holding it together. We got 1, 2 on the top here. So 5 10 mil bolts. Let's see if we can zip them loose and get this apart. And that seems to be coming pretty easily. It's already loose. Okay, that's a bit noisier than I expected. So we might have to undo the carburetor linkages here. Actually, I'm just going to undo them just for the sake of not bending them. There we go. Finally, that let go. We'll remove the spring. This should allow us. There you go. Just rotate the governor linkage out of the way. Allow us. There you go. Just rotate the governor linkage out of the way. This should allow us to pull this out. Is the wiring going to let us come with it? Might have to do a couple of things here. Maybe a few more wires. One of which is going to be your oil sensor, for sure, which we're changing anyways. And then we've got, looks like a ground. Oh, we're not going to get away that easy, guys. Now that I'm looking at it, I'm going to have to remove the carburetor, and it looks like I might have to remove the box over here, the inverter box, I'm basically going to be rebuilding this entire thing to change that one oil seal, and I'm getting into the crankcase no matter what to change that oil sensor. So that's awesome. Well, let's just keep going. Alright, so at this point the intake's just about ready to come off. There we go. And lucky for me, maybe I won't have to remove the inverter box. Be able to hopefully just keep it like this. But I am going to have to remove the stator, or the generator essentially, making the power. Fan comes off. Okay, so now at this point, I'm ready to remove the flywheel, or the magneto essentially. Basically, this is like a giant stator that makes all the power, which gets inverted in through this magical box over here, out to the plug-in. But we have a 19mm bolt holding this on, and it should be left-hand thread. I'm going to find out in a second here, but yeah, that came out like butter. That's good. But the one thing I don't have is a puller. So there is definitely going to be a puller getting these three out, or off of these three. Or maybe I do have one. Let me go check my drawer. Well, it turns out after doing a little bit of digging, I did have a puller that I made a long time ago. And I think I might be able to make this work with some bolts that I have left over from different jobs, and a bunch of washers. Main thing you want to do, guys, is when you do this, when you're pulling out something like this, you get at least 4 or 5 threads in there, because when you're pulling, these are usually on there really tight. You don't want to pull the threads out of the component. So get it in there as good as you can and try and get it square. And you should do this with just a hand tool, but I'm going to hope that it's not too tight. So a little bit of a zippity doodah here should come right off. And it did. Look at that. Oh, and so did my spring here. Before I lose that, let's put that back. And now we're just fighting magnetism, which is quite strong. And we have some oil. And that's what you would use, by the way, guys, that's why you would use a puller, because you don't want to strike any of these magnets loose, because if they fall apart when they're, running at high speed, it's not a good thing. And there is the seal in question, guys. It does actually look a little bit suspect because, as you can tell, once my camera's focused in, it's pretty oily. So we're going to pull it out. We're going to pop a new one in. So in order to give myself the best access and the best possible case of repairing this properly, I'm going to remove the so-called stator here. I like to call these stators because they look a lot like a stator. I've been replacing a lot of these recently. If you've been watching my video, did one on the Rhino, I did one on my Venture. It just seems like it was back to back too, kind of weird. So I'm going to just move this out of the way so that when I start picking away at this seal, I don't damage any of the windings. So, sucks to do this, but I'm going to have to kind of destroy the seal to get it out, but it is already destroyed, I suppose. And there you go. It actually just popped right out, almost too easy. So, I don't know what that's all about, but we're going to clean this up real nice. Make sure we don't have any dirt go inside the crankcase. But even if we did, I have to open up the other side anyways to install the new sensor. One thing I like to do when I'm installing a new seal is I like to add a bit of RTV to the outside of the seal and grease on the inside. The cool thing about buying the OEM parts is this seal, I'm not sure if you can see it, I'm going to bring it up close. You can already see that it's been greased on the inside. So all I'm going to need to do is really add a tiny bit of RTV on the outside. It does two things. It helps it slide into place, and two, it kind of helps keep it in place once it's set. The grease just helps it, you know, promote a good seal because it doesn't burn up on the first startup. So let's just add a little bit of our RTV here. Make sure it's nice and square. And there you go. Now we're going to hope for the best. Now I already did check. There's no play in the bearing or any of that weird stuff causing the oil leak. This thing could have just a whole bunch of hours on it. So I'm going to call that good. Of course, we won't know until it's fully put back together and tested. But I'm pretty confident a new seal will do the job. And now I think we're just going to put this back together on this side so that we don't get this too far out of hand. And the only thing different I'm going to do this time is I'm going to add a tiny bit of thread locker to the hardware so that it doesn't come loose. Okay guys, it's the next day, as you can tell because there's beautiful sunlight behind me. It's actually Friday afternoon. You know, I just come home from work and this is what I got. Again, I get to continue doing more mechanical stuff, but I do it for you guys. So what we're going to do today is, or finish up on this job I should say, is we're going to replace, where did I put it now? Here it is. We're going to replace the low oil warning sensor, and that one there is located inside the crankshaft, inside the crankcase. And if you haven't seen the first half of this video, I'll link it down below. But earlier on when I was testing this generator, I was playing around with the oil levels to try and figure out what was going on, see if this thing was working. And oddly enough, I couldn't get any spark, and then when I topped it off, it was working. So maybe it's working, maybe it's not, but I'm this far into it now. I'm just going to replace it, hopefully without too many more issues, because I think if I take this cover out and I don't damage this gasket too badly, I should be able to get my hands inside because it's located right here, a little bit further in than I wanted, but hopefully the the connecting rod and the actual crank is not in the way. But anyways, let's just get started. So we're going to have to use some 12 millimeters to get that all apart. Apparently it's 2 heat shields. 1. Now let's see if we can slide this apart. Oh, I missed one. No. And I never recommend to pry on these little castings or these covers because they're just made of aluminum. So sometimes just a light tap with a rubber mallet will do it, or a little bit of pressure with your fingertips is enough. Bearing is in great shape. And we've got this little plastic guy, which probably is your governor. Okay. Now I know where this is from, and same as this washer too. So these fell out, and actually luckily they fell out, and I'm happy I'm in here right now. And let me show you why. Earlier during the repair, I had moved the governor lever, which is this guy right here. I had let it swing all the way back here, and by doing that, it actually pulls it away. Can't really see that, but it pulls it away from the governor gear, and you can see those weights in the bottom. As they fly out, they push on this lever, making sure that the throttle doesn't go too high, which it limits the RPM on the engine. So this little guy, all right, let me zoom out here. This little guy actually rides on a pin right in there, and it fell out along with that washer. So I need to put those back in place, because if I don't, and I would have started this engine, it would have like self-destructed. It would have ran wide open with no limitations. So kind of happy I found that. But getting back to the reason why we're in here, here's your sensor. It's actually going to be easier to reach than I actually anticipated in the beginning. So we're just going to unbolt it right from here, and then it goes right through the crankcase. Got the one nut on this side, and then a wire going through. So we're just going to, replace that, of course, but we really have to deal with this right now. Okay, so I decided to carry on with replacing that oil sensor, and then we'll deal with that governor, because I need to probably remove the intake again. So what I've done here is, you can hopefully see that there's a large dot here, and then there's a smaller dot here on this gear. So what I've done by doing that is I've put it into top dead center, and it allowed this cam gear, because the cam is actually connected to the other end. I'll show you when I pull it out, but I can actually physically pull it out now. Now a note on this is, if you're going to rotate this with the spark plug removed, make sure you do it very slowly, because this cam gear is under load and it's going to want to slide out of time, and you don't want that to happen. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to remove it just like that, and that's going to give me access. Oh, speaking, I'm not sure if you guys saw the other video, but here's your automatic decompressor. I was talking about that in the previous video. Just a very simple contraption. I'm going to crack that loose here. And I'd like to make sure that the tools are clean when you're playing in here, especially in the crankcase. You don't want any dirt or debris to mess anything up. So that's loose. Now we can go at this end, and this is probably 13 mil. I got a 12 in my hand here. Oh, it's going to be closer to 14. So let's go grab one of those. We're going to break this free now. Oh, this is going to want to turn inside. Again, hopefully you guys can see all of this. Couldn't position the camera exactly where I wanted, but this is pretty close. I'm going to keep this, and we're going to clean it. Now I should hopefully be able to, oh, and I can't. See, that's the issue. Now my piston is in the way. So how am I going to be able to do this? Okay, so what I'll have to do now is I'm going to have to rotate the engine, but I need to bring it back exactly where it is. Luckily there's a dot there. So I'm going to go, because it's closer for me to go counterclockwise, I'm going to do that. Hopefully that's enough to slide out. A little bit more. There you go. Had to go just a tiny bit more to get that out. There's the old one. Still, the weight in there, the float is still shaking. Maybe it's still in good shape, but I really don't trust it. So I'm going to put in our brand new one. Run the wire through. Okay, wait a minute, guys. One thing that they don't provide you with, I was just thinking about this, like, how is this going to not leak? Well, there's an O-ring here that is supposed to be there that they don't give you in the kit. So I'm going to have to reuse the O-ring from the other sensor right here. And I'm going to make sure that I keep it lubricated, and then that way there the oil will stay where it needs to be in the crankcase. Okay, O-ring going on. Make sure it falls in place, it's lubricated. And do this one more time. That's in. Put the nut back on, nice and clean nut. And that should do right there. Then we can reinstall our 2 bolts with a tiny bit of thread locker. Click. And click. Okay, now I get to deal with putting this crankshaft back in place and reinstalling our cam gear perfectly timed. So I went counterclockwise, we're going to go back clockwise, right up until the dot lines up where it was. And then we drop our gear in place. And we make sure that we are at the right, we're still at top dead center, and we make sure that everything is good. And now from here, we can tackle our missing link here. So what I'm going to need to do for that is more than likely disconnect the linkage so I can swing that out, put the dowel back in place, and then we're good to go. Okay, so we got the little dowel, I'm going to call it a dowel, on top of that governor gear. And just to show you the operation of it now that it's all together, if I pretend that the engine is slowing down and I push, the engine will always have pressure. Now the flyweights are coming in, right? So, or that just, you know, that's just the operation of it. It depends again on your RPMs and stuff like that. I might have had that reversed, but usually what happens is as the engine speeds up, those weights fly out and then they push on this rod and then they usually cut throttle. So anyways, it's all back together, so we can actually bolt this up, put the case back together, put some oil in it, put it all back together, and see if it runs. So at this point, just in order to keep the video kind of a good length, we're going to flip to hyperspeed, and we're going to just kind of clean up as we go along. Reassembly is going to be the opposite of disassembly, so follow along. Okay guys, that took a little bit longer than I expected, probably about, I don't know, 15-20 minutes more, so I was probably 20 minutes in. So yeah, a little bit longer because I just wanted to make sure that I didn't miss any hardware, and my bin is empty except for the used part, so that's always a good thing. You don't want extra parts. We got some oil in it, we got the fuel valve on, let's give it some choke. And I haven't tried it, so let's cross our fingers, hope it works. Yes! Success, guys! Now let's see if it actually powers anything. I don't actually have much that is corded anymore, so I have an old grinder. Like nothing. That's awesome. It sounds good. It's not super loud. For an old machine, these things are really reliable, and hopefully it stays reliable now. So what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to run it for a while. I'm going to do it outside, of course, and going to check to see if there's any leaks. Okay, let's see the progress here. It's been running for about 25 minutes now. And so far, shut it off here. Okay, now let's take a peek underneath. Make sure we don't have any oil. And we don't have any oil. That's great. Just some melted snow. Let's bring it back inside, take a closer look. Ah, there we go. She's a little on the heavy side, but it looks totally dry, which is awesome. Oh, wait a minute, guys. We've got a leak. And there it is. There's a bit of a leak here. And at first glance, you would imagine that it's leaking from the area that I sealed up here. However, if we look closer, not that close, but if we look closer up in here, these fins are wet and they weren't wet earlier. The exhaust is also wet, and that definitely wasn't wet earlier. And then we start looking around here, and there's our valve cover. So the valve cover, stop moving, Rick. Zoom in. Okay, start focusing, please. The valve cover is actually our culprit. So I'm gonna have to go get a new valve cover, and that should be the end of that. But otherwise, this thing is running really, really good. And maybe the other seal wasn't in fact leaking as badly as I had anticipated. It was definitely wet in there, we saw that. But this is also another area that needs attention. So that means I'm gonna have to go back to the store to get a valve cover gasket for this engine and fix that up. But that brings us to the tip of the day. So today's tip of the day is going to be about spark plugs. So spark plugs are one of those things where they're very easy to replace for most part, at least on these small engines. But there's a couple of things that people forget to do. One thing that people forget to do when you're replacing one is to ensure that when you take it out of the box, that the gap is set to whatever the manufacturer's specifications are. Now, on the odd time, sometimes this gap will be too tight or completely closed up because the box was dropped on end. In that case, I probably wouldn't actually use it. I'd probably try and return it and get another one. However, the other thing that people tend to forget is when you put in a new spark plug and it has a crush washer like this, there's a specified torque, and that torque can be found on the box. Now in this application, it's a half turn to 2/3 of a turn. If you don't have the crush washer, there's usually a torque because usually the plug is tapered so that it's a sealing surface, kind of like a machine surface, right? So that is the tip of the day. Make sure you replace your spark plug the way it should be done. And if you have a tip that you'd like to share, don't forget, add it in the comment section. And that's going to do it for today, guys. Slightly a little bit more work on this, but even as it sits, this thing is running really, really good. You could probably get away with RTVing that gasket, but I don't think I want to do that. So again, thank you so much for watching. Consider subscribing if you haven't already. And I will see you all in the next video. Take care, and we'll see you then. Take a look at this valve cover gasket, guys. It is completely crushed, really flat, and that is why it's leaking.